Good
Good
morning.
to see you. Good to see you. We were looking for you. I was putting all my sleuthing powers to use. So it's good to have you here. We're just getting started. And I was just doing a quick introduction to personality AI, psychometrics. But well, everyone here, let me start by introductions. I think there's a large difference in terms of how qualified I am to talk about personality and especially the science of it. And of course, our guest here, Dr. Michal Kosinski. Very quick introductions. Dr. Kosinski, he's currently an associate professor of organizational behavior at Stanford University Graduate School of Business. And I think it's going to take me a while to just run through his credentials. I'm going to focus on the more important things. He's published 70 plus papers in this field with 17,000 plus citations. Um, I think it's been a couple of years. Mikhail, correct me if I'm right. You've been one of the most cited researchers in the world, in your area, or maybe across any field of research. Is that right?
I was very lucky. Yes, I was very lucky.
Yes, yes. So before this, he was a postdoctoral researcher at Stanford, and before this, he was the deputy director of Cambridge Psychometrics Center. What is the most important, one of the most important things about Mikhail? Uh, and I think many of us, all of us, we will probably want to be thankful to him. He was, and you have to listen to this one. He was the first person to actually call out what happened many years ago, if you remember, with Cambridge Analytica 2016 US elections. So the first article that appeared in the press, in the Guardian, if you go and take a look at that, and I've got that here, maybe I can share that. It actually talks about how Mikhail was the person who brought that story to light. So Mikhail, thank you so much. That was huge. I think that's the least we could say about that. And uh, what that will also tell you is, so he has not only deep interest and expertise in this area, but he also has, I would say, deep thought and concern about how this technology can be put to good use, for the benefit of humanity. Because, like any technology, you can go this way, you can go that way. It really comes down to what kind of use we put it to. So with that, I'll probably let you start off. Maybe tell the audience here a little bit about you, a little bit about your research, current areas of focus. I think that'll be a great starting point, and then we'll just flow from there.
Thank you so much for having me here, and thank you for your generous introduction. I'm a computational psychologist. I'm trying to use computational methods such as AI or machine learning models and big data to try to understand humans a bit better. Now, this is not the only lens. This is not the best lens as well to try to understand humans better. Psychologists and political scientists and medical professionals and many other scientists are using many other different ways to understand humans, but it's just the way that I'm using. And given how our lives are increasingly migrating to digital environments, how we are increasingly migrating to digital environments and leaving in the process an increasing amount of digital footprints, it's kind of a good and easy time to be a scientist like me. Essentially, there's this explosion of availability of new computational models. There's explosion of availability of data that can be looked at and examined to try to learn something about people that generate this data. And now, actually, in recent years, there's a new wonderful phenomenon, namely, we are increasingly surrounded by those very complex and very powerful neural networks, such as language models, such as GPT-3, or networks generating images such as DALI. And those models are very complex, very powerful, but they're also similar to humans in some ways. Namely, we cannot really derive the functioning of such models from their design. The engineers that design those models, like the rest of us, are surprised and impressed by how wonderful and powerful those models are, but also those engineers, like the rest of us, are surprised by the fact that those models suffer from biases such as racial or gender biases, suffer from illusions and make mistakes similar to mistakes that humans would make. And while we're all surprised by this, my thinking is that we could use the same tools that we psychologists have been using to study human beings for decades or hundreds of years now. We could increasingly, it seems like we'll be using those tools to study AI as those black boxes are become increasingly complex and we cannot really understand them by looking at the design. And maybe we could use the same trick as we used with humans. We could try to understand and study behavior of AI by simply observing its behavior and putting it in the context of psychological experiments, administering psychological questionnaires, and so on. So this is something that I'm excited about recently.
I think it's a fascinating time to be working in AI. Working, a lot of our work, for example, revolves around language. I mean, that's at the core, and this is just an absolutely fascinating time in terms of what is happening out there. I think in some spheres, I would say AI is surprising us. Even the best of us in terms of what it's capable of, and in some ways, it is not, right? So it's always exciting. Um, let's hear a little bit. So tell us a little bit, Michal, about what is personality AI, what is computational psychometrics, if I use a slightly heavier word, and how does it really come together? I think our audience would love to learn a little bit about the basics from someone like you, rather than someone like us who's more making it useful, but has not deep dived into the research aspect as much as you have.
Oh, well, I'm sure you dived much more deeply than we academics in many aspects. One of the huge advantages that practitioners like you have over the academics is that you have access to data and technology that we in academia will have access maybe in a few years, if ever. But maybe to introduce the listeners and viewers to computational psychometrics or psychometrics in general, this is a science of psychological measurement. So essentially, psychologists quite some time ago noticed that it would be useful to predict people's future behavior and performance, and started coming up with tests and questionnaires. And some of those tests and questionnaires were measuring things such as personality, which is people's tendency to behave in certain ways. Like, for example, extroverts or extroversion, a personality trait, essentially describes a tendency of a person to act in a social and ways, connect with others, speak loudly in social settings, be outgoing, and seek socially stimulating environments, whereas introversion describes the end of the spectrum, where people are more focused on maybe being thoughtful and spending time alone and reading books and pondering on problems rather than constantly socializing. And I'm, of course, describing this kind of caricature of an extreme extrovert and extreme introvert here, but essentially psychologists observe that people differ on this dimension, and it would be useful to predict where people are on this dimension, simply because we could then recommend jobs, careers, educational programs, or even romantic partners that a particular person would vibe with, would enjoy, would thrive in. And now, of course, personality is just one of many psychological concepts that could be measured. Intelligence is another. Political orientation, someone's values, attitudes, all of those, someone's level or risk of depression. So essentially, virtually unlimited number of interesting psychological concepts that we could measure.
So how can we do it? That's a question I think our audience will have. That we hear about it often. What kind of signals are coming out? You've done a lot of work studying Facebook data, Twitter data. We work pretty heavily with LinkedIn data, text data. What kind of signals are actually letting us understand these complex behavioral concepts? What does that data look like, and what kind of algorithms? How do we study that?
Well, in the past, we were using questionnaires. We would ask a person, hey, how often do you socialize? Do you like poetry, or are you liberal? And recently, maybe 10, maybe 15 years ago, psychometricians realized that instead of asking people how often they read poetry, we could just ask people to share their digital footprints with us. And those digital footprints will reveal how often they actually read poetry. Instead of asking people how often do you socialize, one can very easily extract this information from people's Facebook profiles or LinkedIn profiles by counting the number or intensity of social connections and interactions and so on. And there was this explosion of computational models which essentially take people's digital footprints, their Facebook status updates, their Facebook likes, their tweets, their behavior on LinkedIn, whatever they do and write on LinkedIn, and translate this information into accurate predictions of people behavioral tendencies, intimate traits, views, opinions, and preferences. And of course, this carries huge benefits, such as we can improve products and services, we can match people with jobs and careers that they would like, we can allow people to have more self-insights, to understand themselves better. But of course, it also carries risks. As the example of Cambridge Analytica illustrates, you can use such data without people's consent and permission and without the knowledge, and then extract information about them and use this information, for example, to manipulate their opinions, their votes, and so on. So like many other technologies, this technology can be used ethically for people's benefits and unethically as well.
That's the question we're going to deep dive into, because it's a very, very important question. It's on everyone's mind, ours especially to begin with. But before I ask you that question, let me add a point here for everyone. So while all of this is possible, in the case of Humantic AI, as most of you are probably familiar with, so we make a very, very strong distinction between what we choose to study or not. So, for example, we do not study or have any plans to study Facebook data because we believe it is inherently private. That's how people are posting. It doesn't matter what the rules, guidelines are, but that's what people are thinking when they're posting there. So, but what if it's public data? For example, Twitter is public. LinkedIn, what we post is public. In fact, our main mission on a platform like LinkedIn or even Twitter, one could argue, is to help others know more about our opinions, our thoughts, what we are, etc., etc. So that's an important distinction I would draw, because we are talking here at a academic level about a slightly wider topic, not just about Humantic AI. But let's go back to something very interesting that you said there. I think everyone will have that question. Michal, tell us, how accurate was Cambridge Analytica really? Tell us. I think people would love to know that, and what's your take on that one?
Well, we don't really know exactly how accurate they were, because in their communication at the beginning, they were saying they are very accurate. And then when they realized that they're breaking the laws and people are getting very upset, they suddenly said, oh, actually, we're just joking. We were very inaccurate. We were not accurate at all. What I can tell for sure is that it's very easy to be very accurate. You can predict people's personality from just few of their digital footprints with accuracy that is virtually unachievable in other ways. So to give you an example of a result from our own studies, 10 Facebook likes, and Facebook likes are not very intimate. This is not your bank history. This is not your emails. This is just, random funny goat picture, whatever you folks like on Facebook. So 10 random Facebook likes allow predicting people's personality with the same accuracy that can be achieved by the work colleagues. So if we ask your work colleagues, people who spend 8 hours a day with you every day for years sometimes, to judge, to assess your personality using a personality questionnaire. Their accuracy is going to be only as high as what a very simple algorithm can extract from 10 Facebook likes. Now, to outperform your friends and family members, you maybe need 100, 150 likes.
What happens at What happens at 300? I think that's where it gets interesting, isn't it?
Yes. At 300, you're outperforming your spouses. So the most accurate of human judges, our spouses, who spend a lot of time with us, who see us across different contexts, who see us angry, sad, who see us happy. Spouses that have intimate conversations with us, spouses that you married recently, they still pay a lot of attention to you, and yet a very simple algorithm based on 300 Facebook likes can predict your future behavior, can predict your personality with more accuracy than your own spouse.
So that's I don't know if everyone here would know that, but that's how amazing this can be. So, Michal, what would be your message? So we sometimes meet, users, people out there, and they're like, no, this is not really right about my colleague. This is, I think this is very different. So, or hey, is there really even enough data? I never post enough on LinkedIn. How is it even possible? What would you say to some of those users? Is that assessment right? Should they be more open? What would you advise those people, to think in terms of when trying to quickly judge the accuracy of this technology?
Well, so one has to remember that anecdotal evidence always exists that shows, whatever you want to show. My grandfather smoked smoked many cigarettes a day and lived up to being 99. Can we learn from it that smoking is healthy and everyone should smoke? Of course not. It's just anecdotal evidence. Most people who smoke lose, everyone who smokes on average loses 7-8 years of life. And it's the same with those predictions. Of course, we can point out to a person for whom the prediction was not accurate. We can also point out to people who claim that their predictions are not accurate, but they actually are accurate. They just don't want to admit to it, sometimes to even themselves. But what really matters is this overall average accuracy. And here, data is really strong. We have data from literally millions of people where we show how those Facebook likes and other types of digital footprints are very highly predictive of the future behavior. And I want to just point out one other thing, which is while psychologists like me are really excited about Facebook likes or other digital footprints predicting people's personality, it really doesn't matter because personality is just a way. The personality models are just a way of us then predicting behavior again. So we take this diversity of human behavior expressed in digital spaces, reduce it to maybe 5 or 6 personality dimensions, and then extrapolate again to predict future behavior. Whereas if you are Facebook or Google or Humantic AI, then you would take those digital footprints and predict people's behavior directly. And here the accuracy, we know it for quite some time. Algorithms will always outperform humans at predicting human behavior as well as other complex
so that's
phenomena.
That's a big statement and a very I think thought-provoking statement, because there's so many thoughts that come to people's mind when it comes to that. If I'm not wrong, you actually have a research paper on computer accuracy versus human accuracy, and how does it really work. So maybe let's hear a little bit more about that, because it's an important topic. And if there are any questions from the audience here, please type it out. I see one or two. We'll take them up. We'll not necessarily keep them for the end if they're relevant. So please go ahead and do that. So yes, your paper about computers versus human accuracy.
Well, I actually mentioned the results already. That was when I was comparing with spouses and family members and co-workers.
Right.
But the bottom line, computers are more accurate. And folks, I was surprised to learn that we knew it from the 50s. For a long time, I was not born yet. But already in 1954, there was a very famous book published in psychology, which essentially the message of the book was that mechanical, at that time they call it actuarial. So at that time we didn't talk about machine learning or AI or regressions even. At this time we were talking in 1950s about actuarial predictions. And this book, and this famous psychological book, essentially summarized research showing already in 1950s that actuarial predictions, which were not machine learning, was just adding up stuff, adding up numbers, will always outperform human predictions in things such as psychiatric diagnosis or clinical psychological diagnosis. So even if those like most high stakes and very humane aspects of our humane predictions, such as predicting that someone is suffering from depression, even there, from 1950s, machines were better than us.
So I'd like to, I'll take that moment to remind our audience here about the power of this data when it's put to good use. What we can do, how we can help people out there. So we, for example, we talk a lot about, and I'll talk about that. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Kosinski is actually on our advisory board. So he's someone we've been working with, for a while, not just building more accurate algorithms, but more importantly, also making sure that we're putting them to good use. So, Michal, you'll remember we spoke, I think, some time ago, and I was telling you how we do not take certain features, from LinkedIn data, for example, like images or names, because they could induce bias, right? And we are very, very particular about inducing bias. And you had a very interesting suggestion where you said it's better to bring that in and then control it rather than let it be an uncontrolled variable. So little bit, how do we control biases? How do we manage inputs into the algorithms that could fundamentally not just make them wrong, but also perhaps unethical? How do we control that? How do we manage data like that?
So in many ways, data science is counterintuitive and goes against what we got used to when employing humans to make the same decisions. So, for example, in the justice system or in your educational system, the way to avoid people being biased by, let's say, religion or ethnicity or age or gender of a candidate or a defendant, we would try to hide those algorithms. And this is because what we know from psychology is that it's extremely difficult, if not possible, for people to avoid being biased on a subconscious level. We know for sure that no amount of training and no amount of trying will make sure that a person is not biased based on ethnicity, gender, age, and so on. We know actually that in humans, the only solution is to try to have procedures in place that prevent those biases from playing out. Now, so when we started building data science models to make those decisions, the intuition, the instinct was, hey, we're trying to hide, let's say, the gender of the candidates from the hiring managers. Let's try to hide it from the algorithm as well. And the idea was, and in this way, the algorithm is not going to be biased. Now, this is unfortunately not going to work simply because algorithm will very easily discover the gender just from other bits of data, even if you hid the gender variable, and then still will perpetuate the bias that is likely learned from the training data. So here, actually, with data science-driven algorithms, the trick is to openly tell the algorithm, look, this is the gender, ethnicity, political orientation or religious orientation of this participant, and I demand that you treat all of those participants equally. So essentially, you correct explicitly for those biases. But I also want to raise one other important issue that I often myself, but many other people, spend their time trying to audit algorithms and try to understand the risks of those algorithms. Most of my work is essentially focusing on not only benefits, but also downsides and risks of the algorithms. But let's not forget that when we judge the usefulness and utility of those algorithms, we shouldn't be just focusing on their flaws. We shouldn't be comparing them with perfection, because guess what? No algorithm will ever be perfect and perfectly unbiased and perfectly accurate. What we should focus on is on comparing those new modern algorithms with our best available alternatives. And in most cases, the best available alternative is a human decision making. So when you are saying, hey, this algorithm is maybe biased, let's not forget that this algorithm is going to supplement or replace the work of a human being who is demonstrably even more biased and even more prejudiced and even more inaccurate. So while striving for perfection, we should not forget that if the algorithm is better than our best available alternative, which usually is a human, then it's probably already useful.
So I remember some time ago, Wall Street Journal interviewed me, and this was exactly the question. Now, of course, as we all know, media likes to, dig deep into where they can find a fault, because that gets people's attention. And this is exactly, I think, what I said back then. I keep telling people today that in many ways, our job is actually very easy. Our job is not hard, because the baseline is just not high enough. Often enough, we just have to be better than what humans are doing. Now, if if there's anyone here that would say, I am really bad at judging people, please type a comment here and you will get a gift from me. Anyone here, do that and you will get a gift from me. I will get in touch with you if you really mean it. The point is, there's no one out there who thinks that they are bad. Everyone, all of us think we are good. I am good. I can make people out in a second, in a jiffy. But that's not what data says. That's not what science says. That's not what research, tells us, today. So on that note, we'll take up a couple of questions. I think there's a couple of questions that have come in that are very interesting and very related to what we're talking about. So, Mikhail, one question I see is, so you've spoken about Facebook likes. How about, posts that people like, or pages that people like, or even the language used in that? How is that as a signal? How useful is that? What would you say?
So in my experience, but also experience of other people studying this issue, virtually any type of digital footprint can be used to predict future behavior and also reveal intimate traits or tendencies or preferences of people. And this is because, by definition, nearly, if you have a consequential trait, if you have a consequential behavioral tendency, it is going to affect your life and it's going to affect your behavior in virtually every domain. Not in large ways, those ways are going to be minute. Your personality affects the time of the day when you wake up. It affects how much time you spend at work. It affects how quickly you eat. Those effects are tiny, but in a large database, they're detectable. And then they can be, by a well-designed model, they can be utilized to predict your intimate traits with high accuracy. So this data ranges from Facebook likes to your profile picture. Some of the studies I've conducted, we looked at people's profile pictures, and it turns out that the facial recognition algorithm can take your image, your facial image, and predict not only your age and gender, ethnicity, obvious things, humans can do it as well, but can also predict your personality, political orientation, religiosity, all sorts of things that humans struggle with predicting from other people's faces. And in fact, it's kind of unclear how the hell algorithms are doing that. How can they predict those traits from from a profile image? They probably get it to some extent from your facial expression, from your hairstyle, from how you hold the camera when you're taking the picture, and so on. But to humans, it's entirely unclear how those black box algorithms are making those predictions. The only thing we know is that they are very, very accurate, because we can verify the accuracy on real data.
So related question then comes up: can we game the algorithms? Can we write in a way? Can we like certain things? Can I look differently, smile differently? Can I game the algorithms?
We can try, but of course, it's a moving target. It's an arms race. So, for example, to give you an example, people said, let's try to fight the facial recognition algorithms. And pandemic, in fact, provided us with a big natural experiment where suddenly everyone started wearing masks. And what happened is that the accuracy of facial recognition algorithms decreased at the beginning because a large part of the face was hidden. But very quickly, algorithms essentially learned to put more weight on your eyes and top of your nose and what's happening on your forehead. And algorithms can analyze, for example, small patterns of wrinkles or small patterns of moles on people's foreheads in a way that humans we didn't learn to do this. We are great at recognizing people's faces, but most likely we're not really focusing on the wrinkles of the forehead. And evidence for it is that you can guess who that is, even if they're wearing a hat. You will have no problem guessing who they are. But it turns out that algorithms can employ all sorts of little pieces of signal that are not obvious or not useful to humans, and they can very quickly catch up. Now, some other people suggested, hey, what if I just did a lot of random things on social media or online and so on? And well, you can do this, but first of all, it would be just very bad experience for you and everyone else. Just someone constantly tweeting random stuff is going to be just unbearable to follow. Not to mention that a good algorithm would still be able to see through the noise. Even if you have a lot of noise, but there's some real signal behind this noise, given enough data, even a simple algorithm will be able to distinguish between the two and make an accurate prediction.
So there's a question here. Let me just read it out. Have you looked at the variances between LinkedIn and Facebook data to understand the differences between reality and the persona people promote? So I can summarize. I think I get it, but would you like me to, or I think
I think
you
let
already
me
know
give it a
what's
try.
being asked.
I think I know. So there's this question that people raise all the time. How can we be sure that what people tell us in a questionnaire, because the same question applies to a questionnaire, how can we be sure that the answers to a questionnaire are really representing true personality? How can we be sure that what people do on Facebook or what people say in a personal conversation are a reality? How can we be sure that if you come to a therapist and therapist asks you a question, that you actually will answer honestly? And the answer is, we can be sure that you will not. It's certain that people change, alter, polish their behavior and polish their responses. So we know that people alter their behavior, but they're altering it in predictable ways. And it turns out that people also like their personalities. Extroverts like being extroverted, and they think that being extroverted is good and desirable. Liberals like being liberal, and they think that being liberal is what people should be doing. The same applies to conservatives and introverts and agreeable people and disagreeable people. We essentially, most of the sane and normal, psychologically happy people are essentially agreeing with their natural psychological tendencies. And thus, when you give them an opportunity to express them, if anything, they will probably amplify their behavior. So when you look at questionnaires, extroverts or Facebook data or LinkedIn data, it seems that introverts and extroverts and liberals and conservatives and so on become even more so than in reality. So this grayishness is actually reduced, and they become more kind of caricatures of themselves, which makes the measurement even easier.
Even easier. That's fascinating. So I'll also, Todd, this question is from Todd Nelson, I see. So Todd, we have taken up studies to compare results for same individuals between Twitter data and LinkedIn data. And what we have seen is, even when there is less data available, the correlation scores can be pretty significant. So scientifically, higher than 0.3, up to 0.4 or so. When there is enough data, which is there for let us say around 80% of people, the correlation scores can go as high as zero point 0.6, 0.65. So it's the same individual, doing whatever they do on Twitter, which could be being an intellectual, which could be, passing remarks on everything, that comes in front of you, or LinkedIn, where you could be promoting your work. So that ability of the algorithms to read through, uh, in some ways we could say, data is really the most naked thing out there. It's everything just shows, everything just shows. Nothing is easier than data to interpret and understand if you are studying it the right way.
I completely agree with
Okay.
that. And there's another interesting observation there, which is that if you have those very active users, and by the way, statistically speaking, teenage women are the most active users on the internet. They leave the most digital footprints. They like everything, they thumbs up everything, they post a lot, they write a lot. So, but the signal in each of those, this torrent of digital footprints, the signal in each single footprint is usually weaker than the signal that is given by a person that tweets or writes something only once a month, because that's more meaningful. They spend more time usually thinking about this. And what happens is that for people who leave very little digital footprint, every single footprint is way more predictive of their future behavior and psychological traits.
Okay, so one more question I see, then we'll move on. We will talk a little bit more about sales as well. And question comes up often: do personalities evolve? And I think you've researched this, as well. I've seen, a paper or two. If yes, then how? Are there some patterns?
Without a question, personalities evolve. In fact, one of the main effects in personalities is that personalities become more clear. So when you look at babies, small children, infants, they already have personalities. They are babies, they are more kind of outgoing and social. Well, they're not really outgoing yet, but they're kind of more socially engaged and smiling. And infants are kind of more introspective and sorry, and focused on their internal lives. Their infants are more agreeable and infants are more disagreeable, and so on. But those differences are relatively small. An extroverted infant is not much more extroverted than an introverted infant. But as people go through their lives, what happens is the differences between people that are intellectual or not intellectual, extroverted or introverted, agreeable, disagreeable, those differences explode. They become more pronounced as people live their lives. And this is because, first of all, there's the self-amplifying character to most of our traits. If you are interested in something, or if you're intellectual, if you're extroverted, you surround yourself with people who are like you, and they will amplify this trait in you. You will choose environments that let you express those traits and polish those traits and become even more extreme in those ways. And you'll be rewarded. Introverts are being rewarded for being introverts. Extroverts are being rewarded for extroverts. So this essentially results in personalities becoming way more pronounced with time. So this is one type of change. The other type of change is that, of course, some traumatic events, some years of self-work on self-improvement or change can also change you. But this is happening at a glacial speed, very, very slowly, which, by the way, is very widely known in psychological therapy. In psychological therapy, we know that we may kind of change the behavior. We can try to give people tools to avoid exploding with anger or succumbing to complete paralysis of depression. But we actually cannot really change the underlying traits so easily. We can, but it will be changed at very, very slow glacial pace.
That's fascinating how the mind thinks, how the personalities impact our thought process, and ultimately the decisions that we take. So let's jump a little bit into sales. That's an area where we spend a lot of our time, a lot of our um, users, a lot of our audience here today is from the sales world. So what do you think about the role of personality in sales? And how impactful do you think it can be? I know you've studied, for example, in the consumer world, impact on click-through rates, on purchase, decisions. What do you think about the role of personality in B2B sales, Michael?
Well, I think the role is huge, uh, and this is because of many reasons. So let me start with one simple observation. Of course, at the end of the day, what matters is whether you have a good product or a service. But here, the competition on the market means that products sooner or later are very similar to each other when it comes to how good they are. Imagine when you're buying a car, there's only so much you can do in terms of offering a given car at a given price, because you have to buy metal and do engineering and so on. And so essentially, when you think about, let me go away from a second from a B2B and go to B2C, selling cars.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, when you look, people have preferences, and some cars are a little better and some cars are a little worse. And you also have those moments of paradigm shift, like electric cars. Now, Tesla is, of course, better because they kind of innovated. But soon, other producers will catch up and will be in a situation where the actual difference between cars is not going to be that large. So where you can make a huge difference is by using marketing, both this wide marketing in, on the internet, on TV and so on, but also personal interaction where a car salesman or a second-hand car salesman approaches a customer, predicts their personality, tries to infer their personality from the interaction, and then shape the interaction, shape the messaging in such a way as to maximize the likelihood of selling the car. And we know it. We know it because we have studied for decades, for example, second-hand car salesmen that sell a product that is fairly uniform and yet behave drastically differently with people depending on their prediction of the personality. And we know that a good second-hand car salesman, by essentially adjusting the communication to the personality of the recipient, can greatly increase the chances of not only selling the product, but also consumer being happy about the product, because it's just not a tool to sell stuff. It's also showing respect to a person. It's also making people feel like they are listened to and like they are being appreciated and so on. And by the way, we all do this. The best evidence is that, of course, we all behave differently when we interact with our parents, grandparents, our wife, our friends, and so on. We change our behavior when we interact with people, not only because we want to communicate more effectively, but also because we want to show respect. We want to show that we understand that this is how this person is and adjust our behavior, adjust our communication to match their style, to match their personality. And I think that essentially the same applies, not I think, we know from scientific evidence, we can show how the success of those interactions grows.
So tell us about that evidence a little bit. What kind of impact did your research observe in, how much people were purchasing more, when personality was leveraged along with demographics, for example, and how much was advertising more effective? I think it will be good for the audience to get a sense of objective results that you've seen.
So in one of our studies, we tried to replicate what Cambridge Analytica was doing, just to see how effective their methods were. So in this study, we targeted people with advertisement based on their personality, and their personality was derived from a single like. We didn't even take 10 likes. We derived people's personality from a single like. And we posted ads on Facebook trying to sell real stuff. We're not selling politicians. We're not selling alcohol or cigarettes. We're selling cosmetics. So the experiment involved people really spending their money. So it's not just something based in the lab where I was just asking people about their opinions. And we found that if you adjust the message to match person's personality, you can boost the sales by 50 to 75%. Actual sales.
50 to 75%.
Yes. And we are talking here about, first of all, very crude personality assessment. It was just one like. It wasn't 10, like. It was just one Facebook like. So if you boost this, you boost your effectiveness. But also we are talking about the environment where marketing is already highly optimized, when you post an ad on Facebook already chooses which people are going to see the ad and tries to optimize this marketing communication. Now, how much they're trying to optimize, we don't really know. And actually, many people would suspect that Facebook is not really trying that hard, because Facebook doesn't really care that much. And in fact, the more people compete for eyeballs, so the less accurate the Facebook marketing, the better. But this is a side notion, a side idea here. The bottom line is this is already very highly optimized marketing environment. And yet, personality targeting allowed us in those experiments, and we run it across many different products and run it many times, boost the efficiency, boost the sales by 75%.
That's an incredible number. Let me remind our audience here for a second. B2B selling is not that optimized. 90% of B2B sellers just spray and pray. So if this is what can happen in an optimized environment, I think we can just imagine what is possible in a unoptimized, non-optimized environment. So we've almost reaching the end of our hour. I think a couple just quick things. A big question always is around ethics, morals, privacy, etc., etc. Again, something we've discussed, something we care a lot about. What are your thoughts? What would your words of advice be to someone like us who builds this technology, or for our audience, our users here?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, modifying one's communication in recognition of individual differences between people, or differences between organizations as well, is just not only a good business practice because it boosts sales and customer satisfaction, but it's also a sign of respect. We should talk differently to people depending on who they are. And we definitely do it in person. We just automatically do it in person when we adjust our behavior while we chat with other people. And sometimes we have just met this person, and yet we'll treat them in a unique, customized way. So the bottom line is that I believe that going forward, we should make sure that we behave in the same way when we interact with people online in the digital spaces, even when we interact with them automatically through algorithms. And by the way, this is what people want. People chose Google because they came to Google, they could come to Google, they could put a query in the search engine and get personalized results, personalized not only for the query, but also for themselves. They didn't want to go to Yahoo, which was showing everyone the same, huge number of links to things that Yahoo believed was important. Now, people go to Netflix because Netflix chooses the movies that Netflix believes that a given person will want using a recommender system. And people love it. People don't want to watch the same thing that everyone else watches. I mean, some of us do. But people just want to see things that they will particularly enjoy. And I think that we should essentially, I hope that we will have more of that in interpersonal or algorithm-to-person communication in digital spaces as well.
Okay, so we're reaching the end of our hour here. We have a few minutes to go. So I see a couple more questions here. We'll try to take them up. If anyone has more questions, please just type them out in comments. We are trying to take those questions up as we are going. So whatever we can manage, we'll manage. There's a question from Daryl Allens. What is an example of selling to introverts? Do you have a take on that? You're not a salesperson, but I'm sure you will have some insights.
Well, in our study, we sold the same product, both to introverts and introverts and extroverts. And by the way, we also distinguish between many other psychological traits. But to give you an example about this particular trait and cosmetics, the ad that was aimed at extroverts was showing a person in a context of a party surrounded by other people, taking a selfie, and with a slogan that said, shine among others, so like shine among friends. Whereas introverts were targeted with the same product It's just that they were targeting a picture of a person sitting at home in front of the mirror and applying makeup, and I forgot what the slogan was, but it was something focused on, just being happy and satisfied with yourself, by yourself, or whatever it was. Essentially, it was not stressing the social aspect of a cosmetic, and this created a huge boost in sales, because of course we would show introverts and extroverts both versions, and introverts showed huge preference for the one that didn't involve a party and involve other people and selfies and so on.
Okay, so let's see if there's anything else. We almost at the end of our session. So yeah, please type it out if there's anything else. And now maybe the last question, if you don't have anything else. So last point, so we've spoken about it often, and at Humantic AI we talk about our mission, being to humanize interactions. That's how we like to put it. For those of you who don't know, I often say sales is chapter 1 of our book, because that's one use case, one interaction that is very transactional inherently. I'm trying to sell you something. So humanizing that just comes naturally as one of the first things to do. But otherwise, when we talk about the name Humantic AI comes from humanizing, so we talk about humanizing the internet as our mission. So, Michal, we've discussed that a little bit here and there. What do you see as the future of this technology? Sales, hiring, I think there are some obvious use cases, but what do you see when you look far out there? What all good is possible if we put it to the right kind of use?
Well, I think that's perhaps the biggest change is that going to be that between us and the information space, or between us and maybe even other people, especially in the digital environment, there will be our personal artificial intelligence model. So not sure if you folks had a chance to interact with models such as GPT-3 or DALI, which show superhuman performance at analyzing texts, analyzing facts, remembering things, understanding things, and being able to then customize this message to a particular recipient. Like you can ask, for example, GPT-3 to summarize the French Revolution for a 5-year-old, and it will be great at doing that. And let's also remember that we are just at the very beginning of the evolution of those models. And GPT-4 actually GPT-3 was 200 times larger than BERT, and now GPT-4 is again 200 or 300 times larger again. And so we're at the very beginning of this technology, but already you could imagine that instead of just reading an article online, you could ask this AI to read it for you and then summarize it or explain it to you, or maybe make it longer to add things that the AI knows that you wouldn't know. And in this way, instead of all of us reading the same thing, or all of us watching the same piece of video, or listening to the same piece of music, you could have this additional layer of interpretation and improvement, potentially, of this content for our own understanding and our own preferences. And I think that this may be, and by the way, this also carries risks of us becoming increasingly more disconnected from some underlying shared understanding and content. But it also could mean more engagement, more understanding, more satisfaction, more people willing to read books that are not willing to read today, or watch movies that are not willing to watch today.
So on that note, I think a couple of last things. So one is we've always believed that internet technology by default tends to disconnect people and draw them apart. But we also see an opportunity here when we help not just technology be more, when we're not only trying to personalize technology more for ourselves, but when we're using this to understand other people. So it actually has the potential to bring people together. When you meet someone for the first time and you know about them a little bit, and you try to be, act, talk, communicate in a manner that they appreciate, you are being understanding. and if they were doing the same thing. But the other part, of course, as Michal's called out here, is also um, personalizing the experiences for everyone. So I think in sales world, we often talk about, we tell our customers about, personalizing the whole sales funnel using personality AI. I often say that's maybe the only way to personalize it through and through. But it seems it might be the only way to not just personalize the sales funnel, but personalize the internet itself. So, on that note, we will close today. Michal, thank you so much for taking the time. This was a fascinating, fascinating conversation, and I'm sure our audience would love it. So, if there are more questions, we'll just send them to you. But thank you very much for taking the time to join us, and thank you everyone for joining us for this discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.